Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Bear with us while we let people in out of the waiting room. We're happy to see so many both new and familiar faces. And as you're coming in, please feel free to rename yourselves by right-clicking on your own square or clicking in the upper right-hand corner so we know where you're coming from. And we will go ahead and get started in just a second as we let people in out of the waiting room. Why don't we, in order to maximize the time to hear from Frank, I will go ahead and get us started with some very quick announcemements and introduce myself. I'm Beth Novak. I am the founder of the Governance Lab and the Burns Center for Social Change in Northeastern University. And I am delighted that we are welcoming today Frank McCourt, author of, wait for it, The Biggest Fight. Frank, you modestly don't have 10 copies of it behind you like most pundits do on the news, but we'll do that for you and put some links in the chat to this wonderful book. Frank is also the executive chairman of McCourt Global and founder of Project Liberty. We're going to put his full bio in the chat, but I think most importantly, spiritually, at least, we are all from Boston. And Frank, of course, and his family have an important role that they have played and continue to play in Boston, where they have merged community and social impact now for well over 100 years, having launched their firm here. And so we look forward to being in the same place at the same time, but I'm very glad we can welcome such an international audience to join us here today from all around the world to talk with you about the new book. As part of our series on rebooting democracy in the age of AI. So just as a word of note for folks, there is a lot of challenges, and the book does a phenomenal job at talking about what's wrong with the current state of the internet and social media. But in this series, we like to focus on what we need to do next, what we can do to actually deepen democracy, improve governance, and improve, as we shall hear about, the internet and hear about why that is such an important linchpin to everything that ails us today. So Frank, congratulations on the book. Thank you so much. We want to hear about this. And of course, I think you have a large crowd here today eager to hear about how this relates to the proposed acquisition of TikTok, which I hope we'll get into very early on as we talk about what the solutions are. But I think in order to understand the solutions, we have to first talk a little bit about the problems. We have to talk about what you describe as today's feudal internet, where the corporate overlords surveil us and control our data. And you make a very strong argument about why this is the linchpin of our problem. So encapsulate for us, tell us about the problem so that we can get quickly to talking about how we're going to solve it.
Well, Beth, first of all, thanks for having me. And Bonnie, I really appreciate everyone else who's on the call here taking time to zoom in here and listen to this conversation and hopefully participate. You mentioned, Beth, that the book talks about the problem to some degree, but I hope people really come away with a sense that there are solutions to this problem and that it is a very fixable thing, and we'll get into that. So about feudalism and how I framed the book. I actually have been asked often, can you talk about, like, hey Frank, what's another project of this scale that has occurred in history that might act as sort of a metaphor or analogy? And when you think about it, it's really the American project. And the reason I say that and use that as a framing device in the book is that 250 years ago, there was a kind of a reverse set of issues where basically subjects to a monarchy were given the idea, really, this new idea of, like, why not be citizens? And Thomas Paine, in his pamphlet Common Sense, he said, look, settlers, we have a choice here. We can choose to remain, to be subjects, not have any rights, or we can choose something called citizenship and have rights, all of us, born with these rights, what became known as inalienable rights. And yeah, and we can own property and we can govern ourselves and so on and so forth. And, this was a great debate 250 years ago. And thankfully, our forebears chose citizenship and democracy and so forth. And why is that relevant? Roll the clock forward. We're living in an age where technology is awesome. Technology is fantastic. The internet inherently, a fantastic thing. And we're racing ahead. But at the same time, I would argue that we're regressing socially. And the reason I believe we are regressing socially is that we are losing our personhood in the digital age. We're losing our agency. We're losing our autonomy. We're losing our ability to choose. We're losing our free will because the technology has gotten so powerful. So yeah, of course, the autocrats and the centralized power people, they're not, in robes with crowns, but they are every bit as powerful, maybe more powerful. And our digital being, our personhood, is now within the control of these large platforms. And I think this is very, very problematic. And that's why I chose the American Project in Pain as kind of a framing device, and this feudal system that used to exist that we broke away from with tremendous positive results. We're now kind of returning to a modern day techno-feudal system.
So I'm curious, in your view, kind of how we got here to this place where companies know more about us than governments, and governments have acquiesced in this situation of unaccountability, where we don't own our own data, where we have so little these companies have so little accountability to us. And we'll get into it a bit more. You're not an enemy of the free market, to be very clear. Quite the contrary. But I'm wondering where this imbalance came from in your view. Is it the fault of the "we have to compete with Russia and China" argument, or how did we get here that we just ceded so much control?
Yeah, so yeah, for sure. Let me stipulate up front, if it wasn't clear, I'm a capitalist. I'm pro-business. I love technology. My family builds technology, systems, and at large scale. We've been building infrastructure for 131 years. It's about how this internet technology is being used that I'm really very critical of. And again, it's not all technology. We're talking about internet technology, and social media being the poster child here. So how did we get here? The internet is a relatively new invention. As most people on this call probably realize, it came out of a government program to actually decentralize our telecommunication system. This was in the Cold War era. Our telecom was very centralized. AT&T was a monopolist, and there was a fear by our government that the Soviet Union was the enemy at the time, would disable our communication system by disabling our central hubs. And so the government said we need a decentralized communication system, and funded research at 4 universities to do that. 50 years ago, these researchers agreed on a simple thin layer protocol called TCP/IP, which connected devices, and the internet was born. And that was a huge innovation. And then, of course, it was iterated and built upon and so forth. And 15 years later, 35 years ago, Berners-Lee came up with the idea of another thin layer protocol, HTTP, to connect data. So now we have devices connected, data connected. And by the way, as a footnote here, 50 years later, we're still an IP address on the internet. We're a device on the internet. We are not on the internet as people. So everything, TCP/IP, HTTP, it's all good so far. Decentralized internet, designed and envisioned by these creators, these visionaries, to make us all smarter, help us share information, knowledge, advance civilization. And then roughly 20 years ago, something happened. And what happened is there were some that realized early that collecting data and aggregating it would be whoever won that would, they would be the winners, and they would figure out how to monetize that. And so we entered the app era, the era where the internet became centralized and ultimately colonized. And so this was the era when the big apps started to show up, and I'm talking about social for sure, but also search and shopping and all that. And what was discovered is that it's not like all data that is data that's going to impact us positively or negatively. It's our personal data, our social graph information that was particularly valuable. It's kind of the holy grail now of the internet. And these centralized apps just really learn more and more and more and more about us because they're scraping data from us constantly, right? So think of it as we're all now kind of micro profiled. And they had all this data. Now, what are we going to do with it? They asked. And the idea was advertising, right? So we know all this about each of these individuals. Let's push ads and sell them things. So the ad tech economy emerged. And that, in retrospect, it's not nice to be micro profiled or be surveilled or have all of our information scraped. But when you look back, just pushing ads to us to buy stuff we might want seems benign compared to what's going on now, because the same information that these platforms have and have gleaned about how what we might want to buy or where we might want to eat or whatever, it's now information about how we think and how we feel, and so feeding us news that is that we might agree with, actually opinions and influencing us, and so on and so forth. So it's gotten to the point where this is extremely dangerous technology. And Jack Dorsey, the creator of Twitter, said something in Oslo this summer that I don't think was paid attention to quite enough. He said, we should be talking far less about loss of free speech and far more about the loss of free will. So in answer to your question, Beth, I think it happened kind of in this way that it just crept up on us. It really started off as this decentralized internet that was inherently good. Everybody said, oh, the internet, connectivity, high-speed internet, this must be good. And we all jumped into it. And then we've realized now that we've let this get away from us. It no longer resembles anything like it was invented to be, or that the creators and visionaries who invented it intended it to be. And it's now, we're realizing, is actually much more resilient than our political system. It's much more powerful than parents' ability to parent. It's become and it's no longer something that we can opt out of. The internet is part of our lives, and we're dependent on it.
So Frank, I want to ask you, and let me, as I push you now into focusing a bit on talking about the solution, I just want to remind people, we have some phenomenal people here. I see professors of political science. I see Pulitzer Prize winning journalists. I see students. I even see my cousin is here. So we have so many great people in the audience. I want to invite people to please use the chat to continue the conversation in a kind of third dimension, if you will. I want them to argue and take issue, and to start to put your questions also for Frank in the Q&A as we go along. But I want to ask you now, what this leads to for you is a very specific set of solutions that do not echo what we've heard from a lot of other people about the advertising model. So many people talk about this kind of relentless push towards engagement, the fact that the algorithms are now optimizing around engagement and how that's driven by the free advertising model. But you, for us, have a very kind of different proposed solution in terms of decentralization, in terms of data ownership. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that, and what do those features of the new net that you want us to build, that third generation human internet, what does that look like in your view?
Yeah. So, at first, Beth, I thought that the the way forward here may be let's lean in with the policy making. You know, my family helped start a public policy school in Washington, D.C. with Georgetown right on Capitol Hill to really say we need better policies here. We need to get out in front of this growing set of problems that's going to get worse and worse if we don't have the policies and the regulations to fix it. Sadly, I realized that the policymaking apparatus we have is no match for big tech. Big tech is more powerful, it's more wealthy, it moves much more quickly, and it just, our policymaking apparatus is by design deliberate, thoughtful, slow moving, and tech is anything but that. So that's when we shifted our focus to the actual infrastructure, the technology. Met with some of our leading computer scientists. I'm an engineer, not a computer scientist. I'm a builder of infrastructure and other things. Sat with them and said, how would one go about fixing this problem if you had a white space? You know, we weren't starting from the vantage point, well, investors will never go for this, VCs will never go for it, or big tech will be against it, or this or that. No, let's just think about this from the vantage of what if. And what was very insightful for me and a real aha moment was when a gentleman by the name of Braxton Woodham said, you know, the way to fix this is to come forward with another thin layer protocol like TCP/IP and HTTP, but this time make it a protocol that enables people to control their identity and their data, and actually for the first time put us, people, kind of on the internet and in charge of our identity and our data. So return agency, control, autonomy, choice, etc., to individuals, and that will be the start from the bottom up of a different internet. I found that suggestion to be, as I said, an aha moment. That was, I thought, simple, brilliant, direct. And because as an infrastructure builder, I know you fix things from the bottom up, not from the top down. This problem is never going to be fixed at the app layer. You know, it could be, things could be improved and some damage mitigated and so forth. But to fix the problem totally, we need to start from the bottom up. So I sent them out to go ahead and find someone doing this work, thinking in a similar way, so we could team up with them. They came back and said that they couldn't find anyone. I asked them if they could go ahead and assemble a team and create a protocol and build the wireframe of the entire stack to make sure it worked before we, you know, I opened my mouth, obviously, on this and so forth. And that's how this project emerged. They assembled a team and went out and started to build the technology from the ground up. That was 5 years ago, December 11th of 2019. And, you know, now there's, you know, we have a summit later this week in DC with 500 people there that are all now part of this project, building on it and doing things. And so the point is, the insight I found so beautiful was we need to be in charge of us. Let's stop thinking about data. Let's start thinking about personhood. Everything about each one of us is captured now in this digital age. Everything about us, hundreds of thousands of data points. Shouldn't we own us? Shouldn't we own our digital DNA and decide what to do with it? I think yes. And so this new protocol enables that to happen. And now you build up on top of it an internet where, you know, people think of an internet where rather than clicking mindlessly on terms and conditions of use of a few platforms, there are thousands of apps built clicking on our terms and conditions of use for our data, including, by the way, getting compensated for data, depending on the commercial use. So it is really about, Project Liberty is, yes, there's a tech component, and yes, we have to fix the tech, I believe, to solve the issues that we're confronted with, but it's much bigger than a tech project. It's really a social project or a civic project, because fixing tech alone doesn't solve everything, obviously. But this time, let's get social scientists and others at the table so that we're not just letting technologists alone decide what's good for society.
So what does that look like very practically? So if, and I'm going to put a link in the chat to the people's bid for TikTok to kind of go with the courts. If you end up, you use acquire TikTok as the consortium is hoping to do. How does the experience on TikTok a year from now look different than what our life looks like on Facebook or Twitter today? And does it resemble sort of what we're seeing with Blue Sky or Mastodon or other platforms? Tell us just very practically, what does this new net experience look like? And specifically, what kinds of data do you want to make sure we have ownership over and is portable?
Yeah. So Project Liberty, as I said, was started 5 years ago. The book I've written came out in March. The project wasn't started with the idea that TikTok was going to be, TikTok legislation was going to pass. The book wasn't written with that in mind either, that the legislation was in April. But we saw the TikTok moment as super opportune, because here's technology that now many people are engaged in building. And by the way, we have the proof of concept. There are now over 1,300,000 people using what I'm describing, okay? Controlling their identity, their data, and so forth. So it's proven the technology works, but scale is necessary. Without scale, there's no alternative to the current internet. 170 million users moved over to a new protocol where each user would be in control of their digital experience, catalyzes this alternative internet. So people would have a choice. Do they want to be on the internet where they're surveilled and targeted, or do they want to be on a different form of internet? So the TikTok opportunity, Project Liberty, is far bigger than the bid for TikTok. We feel, however, that the people's bid for TikTok is very serendipitous. This is a very interesting moment in time where this could actually catalyze this reimagined internet. The type of data we're talking about is people's personal data. It's their social graph information. It's your digital existence, your digital archive, everything about you in this digital age. And so that information, we think, should belong to the individuals who created it, who it reflects, who it really, I call it digital DNA. And I imagine an internet where you don't have 50 passwords. You have a single sign-on. You log in with Liberty. You log in with something which is your handle, and you're on the internet. And it's your internet again. It's not a few platforms' internet. And now the apps that are built are, as I said earlier, are clicking on your terms and conditions of use. The apps are interoperable. Your data is portable. And your relationships, your friends, your followers, your archive, if you don't like how some app is using some of your information, you're not stuck there. It's not a walled garden. You pick it up and move it. It's yours. So the difference between what we're talking about and Mastodon or Blue Sky, and those are different examples. Mastodon is a federated version. What we're talking about is not a federated internet. We're talking about a fundamentally re-engineered internet where people have a universal identity, right? They have their identity. It's not held by anyone else. Blue Sky, which is benefiting right now from a migration from other platforms, you're still, when you're on Blue Sky, you can't leave unless you want to leave your archive behind. We're suggesting that even Blue Sky should be built with a protocol on top of a protocol like DSMP and be a great use case, and really have to really continue to impress its customers and live up to what it's promised, because they know their customers could otherwise pick up and go somewhere else. And interoperability is vitally important. Identity and interoperability are two key features that don't exist in the current internet that work hand in glove and need to exist in the next version of the internet, in my opinion. By the way, think of this very much like where telecom was in the early 90s. My family built a telecom company called RCN, and at that time, phone numbers were not portable and phone carriers were not interoperable. And we proved with RCN that they could be interoperable. And we started that company in 93. In 96, the Telecom Act was passed. Phone numbers became portable. Carriers became interoperable. Now, think of your social graph, even though it's far more valuable than a phone number, as your modern day phone number. It's your identity. You should own it and you should move it where you want. And think of the apps as, rather than 7 baby bells that existed in the early 90s, now you can choose any carrier you want. Think of the apps that way as in the same way, interoperability.
So there has to be a kind of legal and policy dimension to this, right? Enforcing, you mentioned the Telecom Act that created the enforcement mechanism for phone number portability, without which it wouldn't have happened. Without some legal framework, and I know you talk about reform isn't going to come from Washington and it's not going to come from Brussels, but without some sort of legal or policy framework, how do you ensure that it doesn't just replicate what we see now, which is, with European privacy agreements, it just leads to yet another thing I have to click on where I agree to their terms of service. So do these two things go hand in glove, and or can you do it without? Can you, if successful, can you build a company, a market-based alternative that paves a different way without the need for law and policy from your perspective?
Yeah. So we're using all kind of metaphors. So I'll use another one, which is chicken or egg, right? So I think Europe is a good set of experiences to bring forward here now. So in the U.S., we have tremendous technology, internet technology, big companies, biggest ever, and are a very, very, I would say, insufficient regulatory and legal environment. When you have the last major act that was passed is 1996, affecting all this. A lot's changed since 1996. So Europe, on the other hand, has a very robust regulatory regime, a very clear set of public policy objectives now codified in law, but very weak technology to enforce them. So they're struggling a lot. We need both, but what the point I try to make in the book is, because our Congress is not acting, and because, with the exception of TikTok, which we'll get to in a moment, we need to build it. We need to innovate first. That's what we did with RCN. 3 years before the Telecom Act, that we were building the new telecom systems that were built with using, the internet, right, and fiber optics. And so we need the policy making, but I believe we need to bring the new technology forward so there's no doubt it works, and people demanding change. And that's when people came to us to sign up for RCN and wanted to come with their phone number and we couldn't give it, believe me, people started to say, I want choice and I want to take my phone number. That's when the politicians acted. So we need both, but I believe that the chicken comes before the egg, the chicken being the innovation, and then the policies will come forward. And just like the Telecom Act came forward and enabled a better telecom system. By the way, since 1996, $2.5 trillion have been invested in telecom, private investment enabled by some very simple ideas like phone number portability and interoperability. So I think that we're at one of those inflection points again, where people are now realizing that something is broken here, that something's not right. And this, we see how our political system is struggling. We see how our information ecosystem is struggling. We see how parents are struggling. We know that the current internet is broken. It can be fixed. It can be fixed.
So I want to, incidentally, by the way, I would say that in addition, one of the other big groups, and we have a lot of academics here and professors and whatnot, one of the big areas ripe for this kind of innovation is the academy, where the big fact that you can't move from SSRN and take all your downloads with you over to Web of Science and vice versa means you're really stuck in these platforms, which has very significant consequences, I would say. Apropos of which, I really want to ask you if you could just draw the connection more explicitly. You talk eloquently in the book, and there was a beautiful Andrew Solomon piece in the New Yorker just a few weeks ago about youth suicide. And you really draw this connection between why this kind of, if you will, this rot at the center of the internet, as you describe it, is leading to these significant societal problems. How does this solve the problem of youth suicide in your view? Can you just draw that connection more explicitly about why this ends up becoming a healthier, more civic, better place for democratic values?
Yeah, it was interesting to me that when we announced the People's Bid for TikTok, the first group that came forward to support it were a group of parents, and and it's sad but true that they are going to be the change makers here, because they're bringing forward their stories, and their stories, are extreme. They've lost children to the harms of social media, and look, I think, Beth, every parent with children of a certain age is having this conversation right now at home. By the way, I'm a dad. I'm a father of 8 children. Okay, so I'm very concerned about this set of issues. Now, the example I use is, I'm the Postmaster General, and I am making an offer to Americans, and I'm saying, you know what? I'm going to deliver your mail for free, no more stamps. And you say, okay, that's interesting. Tell me, what's the deal? Okay, here's the deal. I'm going to put up a camera and listening device in every room of your home, in your workplace, in your car, and I'm going to surveil you 24/7. You say, well, that's super creepy. And I say, yeah, but it's free, no stamps. I said, by the way, I'm going to open your mail. I'm going to read it. And everything I learn is now mine. Your relationships, your thoughts, your feelings, everything mine. You say, well, wait a second. Super, creepy and also unfair. And I say, one other thing. I'm going to read your 14-year-old daughter's diary. And when I find out what she's concerned about, if it's her weight or this or that, I'm going to send her stuff to make her feel worse. And I'm going to then send her things to profit after I made her feel worse. And I'm going to also send her things to show her how to hurt herself, cut herself, harm herself. And this is, and you'd say, you're out of your mind, Postmaster General. I mean, it's creepy, it's unfair, and it's harmful. And that's what we have now. The stories that these parents have about how their children have been taken advantage of and preyed upon are heart-wrenching. And the idea of being able to be a parent again is very hopeful to them. Right now, our homes are the place where we protect our children, right? Our home is our castle. It's our fortress. It's where we can protect our children. We can no longer protect our kids because the monster's in the house. And what I mean by that is the children connected to the internet through social media are being preyed upon in massive numbers. And it's not like a day and age, perhaps that's when we were raised, where our parents could say, hey, enough TV, turn it off, right? You can't turn it off. People are connected. Kids literally say, good night, mom, good night, dad, love you, son, daughter, and they go to bed, and the parents find them perished the following morning because they've done a choking challenge and have made a mistake, because they've been preyed upon by some kind of extortionist or a predator online, and so on and so forth. It is, and Dr. Jensen, who was at Harvard and Children's Hospital in Boston, she's now at Penn Medical, just wrote a book called The Teenage Brain. And she talks about the science behind this and how these apps that are designed to be addictive and are preying on young people whose frontal the frontal portion of their brain is not developed. That's the brain, that part of the brain that controls emotional reaction and so forth. This is the science is in. And I recommend Dr. Jensen's book because she is very deliberate about the facts. We need now to actually build. In the meantime, by the way, you've seen all this legislation banning social media for under 16 in Australia and in schools and so on and so. We know it's bad. Banning it is a good first step. But why have something that we know is lethal? And why not fix it when we know how to fix it? And so this is giving parents the ability to be a parent again.
Anita McGann is asking a question in the chat. She's the former head of the American Academy of Management, all the business school professors in the Americas, is I think asking a question about where you see the business model going. So you're not proposing the end of the advertising-based, free-based services and only paid services, as I understand. Do you want to, and Anita, feel free to chime in if I'm mischaracterizing the question, but do you want to say a word about where you see the business opportunities going at the same time and why you see this evolution is synergistic with a profit-based set of solutions?
Yeah, what we see is the attention economy migrating to an intention economy. And what I mean by that is, we don't see advertising going away and the commercial ecosystem going away. We don't see people not wanting to order something online and have it delivered to their doorstep the following morning. I mean, these conveniences are good, right? I mean, these are, we all rely on it. But rather than have an internet that surveils you and listens to your conversations and targets you, why not have an internet where you can just identify yourself anonymously, but as a verified human being, and you can signal to the internet, to advertisers, to companies, that you are in fact a real person that wants to buy something, that you really want to buy a pair of shoes, you really want to buy a coat, you really want to buy goods, a car, or whatever. Just signal that, and then people that really want to sell you what you want to buy can offer you the product and their price and their terms. And you can then, as a consumer, be empowered to choose between those and pick the one that you want because of the better price, the better quality, the faster delivery. Who knows? You decide. You're in charge. 1/3 of this gigantic economic ad tech economic apparatus is completely wasted because the ads are either misdirected or they're scams or they're just not landing where the advertiser or the company behind the ads wants it to land. Why are we surveilling everybody and just flooding the zone with ads? Why not just say, hey, Beth, you show up online, I'm selling something, you show up anonymously, and you say, I'm interested in buying X, Y, or Z, and I'm a real person. By the way, you don't have to be a real person to be on the internet. You don't have to be yourself, for sure. You can have as many fake personas as you want, or you can even be a machine. Why not have verifiable human beings that signal their interest? Isn't that more valuable to the advertiser? Isn't that more valuable to the company that's trying to sell something?
So as we move into questions in a second from everyone else, I have a long list we're not going to get to that I want to ask you, but I do want to ask you about this moment in time with a new administration, not just a renewed president, but a new first buddy, if you will, who has been both warning us about AI and at the same time is one of the biggest perpetrators of the problems that you're talking about. I'm curious kind of where you see things going in terms of the attitudes in this administration and this Congress towards big tech. And is it aligned with the vision that you have? Are you hopeful, or what is the opportunity here? And when you talk to politicians from either side of the aisle, what's kind of the core story that you're telling them? A big part of this book is about the story that we tell, the way that you make it accessible, the way that you help people understand this, the way that you serve as the Tom Paine of our own age. What's the thing you're using to tell them, and are you optimistic?
Okay, good question, and I'll do my best. I visited with, I think, 60 now senators and other elected officials, and both sides of the aisle, and not a single one has been against what we're talking about. Now, they may have different reasons. I'm oversimplifying, but the more conservative perspective is really grounded in censorship. The more liberal perspective is really more grounded in privacy. But they're all concerned about the harms that are being done and the fact that things are not working properly. But they have different reasons and different goals, let's say. When it comes to turning that into legislative action, there has been very, very little accomplished. The TikTok legislation was kind of a outlier, and that was because of the national security issues, which we can talk about in a moment. But there is a general concern about big tech. Now, what will the Trump administration do? I'm not sure. We're obviously watching it closely. I can tell you regarding our bid for TikTok, Project Liberty is far bigger than the bid for TikTok. We're just going to carry on and be ready to purchase it if ByteDance sells US TikTok. And we believe they will eventually sell it. I don't think anything can be reversed here. I think the national security threat of TikTok is far too great for any president to just reverse it and ignore that.
So I want to start to bring in some of the fabulous people that we have here. And one of the faces I see was instrumental in getting us the internet that we have today, and that is David Johnson. I'm going to put one of his most seminal papers in the articles in the chat. And David, I'm not sure if you can unmute, but I know you wanted to ask Frank a question. And David has been thinking long and hard about how to create a more social citizenship focused net.
Can you hear me?
We hear you, yes.
Yep.
Great, Frank. I agree with a great deal of what you say in the book, and I admire your effort here. But I have a question about whether we should be attacking evil algorithms on the one hand, or trying to create a new property right on the other hand. Because if, as I understand, the book calls for a transfer of ownership to users up to online, and that implies not everything that everyone else knows about you becomes your property, obviously. So how do you draw the line of what the government should create a property right around is my first question.
Well, I think on the algorithms, by the way, I do think that we shouldn't be confused by terms like generative AI, right? Large language models are a more powerful version of the current technology that we have, which is surveillance-based, autocratic, centralized, aggregating, in centralized places, and now applying large language models. So I think centralized generative AI is going to be, everything that's bad now about the internet is going to be much worse. Decentralized AI where people are permissioning the use of their data and to have transparency into the algorithms, whole different story. Could be awesome. As far as a property right is concerned, I love your question. I look at it like this. There are, property rights come with or came with democracy along with our human rights. I see all of this as a human rights set of issues, and accompanied by property rights. I know that these, you look at 5 companies, I don't know, the last time I looked, they were 12, 13, 14 trillion dollars. I mean, trillion, that's with a T. This is unprecedented in American history. Nobody can now say that people's data is not valuable. So what I'm saying is, and I'm leaving it up to people like you to figure it out. And by the way, we have an economic council at Project Liberty Institute, which I invite you to join, of fantastic, economists, much smarter than I, figuring out what a data sharing economy looks like and what is required legally to make it happen. But if you just took half of those trillions of dollars and distributed it to the people who are doing the work and generating the content, you've just helped a lot of people without a single tax. And so I don't know the exact way to do it, but I know that Project Liberty is assembling really smart people from the legal profession and the economic profession and so forth as scholars. And as I said, I invite you to join because, and you probably know many of them that are involved. And if you go on the site, you can see who's involved in the Economic Council of the group of the Project Liberty Institute.
I've got Kostas Panagopoulos, former chair of political science at Northeastern.
Hi there, Beth. Thank you so much. And thanks so much, Frank. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. So this is a very, very timely and innovative enterprise. So I applaud your efforts there. I think one challenge for me is that individuals, when thinking about this digital footprint, digital DNA, are not even accustomed to owning their non-digital DNA and data and identity, right? So their information has traditionally been held in decentralized ways in different organizations. And that might be in part because they're skeptical about a single repository for this kind of massive footprint. So we may be inherently reluctant to adopt such an approach, even if.
Did we lose him?
I think so. Kostas, are you there? I think something happened.
I think I got the gist of the question. Let me just, it's interesting. I want everybody on your call here to understand that these questions are terrific. And I'm not trying to come forward here with answers to every question. I do have a point of view for sure, but I know that there are answers to these questions. And I know Project Liberty is trying to pull together people who are really interested in this subject matter and have something to offer. So Project Liberty is not about being right, it's about getting it right. So I welcome Kostas and David and all of your listeners to join in. Secondly, the repository of the information, we're not proposing some other version of a centralized repository. We're saying each individual is the repository for their information. Of course, there'll be things established where there'll be trusted intermediaries, just like there was the Good Housekeeping seal of approval and the underwriter's laboratory and consumer reports that validate certain repositories or certain goods or products. That will all, I'm sure, emerge. The last point I want to make, though, about this is that, a Project Liberty advisor is a gentleman by the name of Todd Golub. You may know him because he runs Broad Institute in Cambridge. And Todd called me about this project and said, can Broad be involved? And I said, of course, but why are you asking? Because you're involved in molecular biology, you're involved in biotech. What we're talking about right now, at least in the first instance, is information technology. And he said, look, the first human genome was sequenced at a cost of $3 billion. Now, $100 right over the horizon for a human genome to be sequenced, which means every child born in the developed world will have their genome sequenced and have personalized medicine available. Sounds good so far, right? I said, sounds great. He said, 3 questions. Who owns that data? Where is it stored? And who gets to use it for what purpose? These are the questions. All of this, everything now is digitized. Who owns it? Where is it stored? Who gets to use it for what purpose? And that's what we're trying to get at here. And this transcends information technology and includes biotechnology. It will eventually include financial technology. There is value here. It all needs to be sorted. But again, let's start by thinking of our data as a human right. It's part of our personhood. And I'm sorry to go on for this, but there's so much here to talk about. And Melissa Fleming, Undersecretary of the UN, said to me when she called us in to talk about the project, she said the UN cannot fulfill a single one of its global goals and objectives because of social media and internet technology. They're constantly distracted and putting out fires. They cannot fulfill a single one of their goals. This is preventing us from solving problems at scale. It's creating problems at scale.
So John Goulet has a clarifying question for you that I think he wants to ask quickly, and then I want to get to a question from Lee Rainey.
Yeah, thanks for giving this talk. So far, people have kind of pressed a little bit for specific solutions, and I want to ask one about the social graph ownership. Given that social graphs contain multiple people by definition, how can you decide who owns a social graph? If one of my friends wants to share theirs and I'm part of it, how do I prevent them from doing that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is the fine line between explaining too little and explaining too much. So it's a social graph is as most or all of you know, is kind of this elaborate web of relationships and information, lots of nodes. You don't really own your data in that sense. You own your nodes, right? And it's reliant on other people. So the idea of permissioning use of your data in some instances will rely on other people permissioning the use of data. So if you think of it again in overly simplistic terms, it's like the phone, right? You can make a call, but someone else has to pick it up for there to be a connection. So there is more than one party involved in this, but starting with your control of your nodes and your pieces is what we're really talking about. And we used it, it's really having more control over those than total ownership. But the idea of ownership implies value. And there is enormous value here that needs to be sorted. As David was saying earlier, like, how do you create a property right? How do people achieve value for this data? We know trillions of dollars are being created and it's only going to grow. How does that get to the people creating the nodes in this graph? And by the way, we see this as a universal graph, not as a graph, not as information stored on central server farms. We see it as a universal graph where individuals own and control their nodes, their graph.
So I want to, and I see I've been remiss at checking. There's so much going on in both the chat and the Q&A. So with the permission of your team, we might ask if you can stay a few minutes longer to cover some of the questions from our students if you have time. But I want to relay a question that Lee Rainey, formerly of Pew Research, if you've ever gotten asked these formal survey questions, it's probably because Lee wrote them. And still does wonderful work with Elon University, surveying thinkers and doers about their views on tech. So he and I are both wondering really about how this relates to us as citizens. So your solution is very much focused on individuals and kind of this decentralized approach. But as we know, with workers, for example, power comes when we act collectively, and as citizens, power comes when we act collectively. So I'm just curious how in this new net we function differently as a group, and how this affects our relationship to our institutions and our institutions of government in particular.
Yeah, I think it's I think thinking about the internet, thinking about how we operate offline is a really good way of thinking about how we would like the internet to operate. And yes, we form groups, but we make those choices as an individual. The same thing should happen on the internet. You know, we will most definitely need groups to accomplish things, and there will be groups that will select for certain purposes. That's one of the powers of the internet, the simplicity of forming a group, the simplicity of assembling people. It should be done, Beth, with a sense of, I'm choosing this, and I'm actually, not forming a group on Facebook and thinking I'm doing great work and having all of my data and my group's data taken and actually be used in a way that's actually at odds with the very work I'm trying to do. And so let's think about the internet the way we operate offline. Offline, we're individuals. We care about our identity and we protect it. And if we pretend we're someone else, we get punished. If we lie on a resume, or we get fired. If we lie on a college application, we get expelled. There are consequences. In the offline world, we don't share everything with strangers, and we share a lot with our most intimate relationships. Why not have an internet that operates that way, where you can toggle what you share? You can parse your data. If it's only your age you have to share, why do you have to share everything else? If it's only your location, et cetera, et cetera. It should operate that way. The same way when it comes to agency and choice about forming groups and being a part of a group or not being part of a group. Groups will form, by all means, they will form. But I think there'll be more. It will feel more like how groups formed in the past, because people had a like set of interests, or it was in their best interest to form the group for whatever purpose.
So what I want to do is to be respectful of everybody's time, including yours. If you and your team will allow us to go a few more minutes afterwards, what we'll do now is we'll end the formal part of the program and our live stream by thanking you very, very much for this book, for the time that you've given us today to elucidate this work. I want to, again, put a link in the chat, please, to the book and to Project Liberty and to the People's Bid for TikTok. There's going to be an exciting summit coming up with 500 people joining later this week to talk about these ideas and what they're building in support of this. So we're really excited about that. And we want to thank you very much for joining us for this series